This is ABM-A-MA, Ask Me Anything. So we need your questions. Think of your questions, put them in the chat, and we'll go from there. So thank you. I'm seeing some come in already, but first, before we get started, I would love to do some quick introductions. So Daniel, start us off.
Yeah, I'm Daniel Lewis. I'm the Director of Revenue Operations at SalesIntel.io.
Fantastic.
All right, shall I go? I am Libby Durbin. I'm a marketing strategist here at Mojo Media Labs.
And I'm Stephanie Fisher. I'm the content director at, creative director at Mojo Media Labs as well.
It has been a long day. I know you just gave a very long presentation. In fact, Stephanie made a last minute choice to join our AMA because there were so many questions that came from her presentation. So we were taking the time to maybe answer some of those as well. So that's fantastic. And I'm Nicole Rose, president of Mojo Media Labs. All right, so let's jump in here. I am actually going to start with a couple questions that did come from your most recent talk, Stephanie, around, what was it called? Just content strategies for ABM?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, fantastic. So one of the first questions I want to ask you is, should all content be ABM focused? What's the recommended proportion? What would your answer to that be?
That's a great question. So obviously not all of your content on your website is going to be ABM focused. If you think about it, like the target, specific to maybe a one-to-many campaign that you're running or a one-to-one campaign, like not all of your content is going to be personalized, right? Across your website, you're going to have a lot of variety. So I think the key when you're thinking about content for an ABM campaign or a specific, one-to-one or one-to-few campaign, is that there's no like specific ABM content type, right? So like every piece of content, like all of the content that you have on your website now could potentially be repurposed for the audience that you're going after, right? So you could have case studies or ebooks or guides on your website that you could take and then fine tune and personalize for that particular group of accounts, so that it speaks more to their problems and their pains and what they're looking for. And it's not necessarily ABM content, right? It's just like something else that you already have that you can work into and repurpose for your ABM program.
I love that. That's great. Libby or Daniel, anything that you'd like to add on to that question?
Daniel, you can go ahead, and then I have one little thing, unless you don't have anything.
No, I don't have anything.
Yeah, I honestly think we talked about this a little bit in ABM Foundations too. It's always good to start with evergreen content that you can repurpose. That way you can leverage it for various different types of personalization, whether it be like persona or industry based. And Steph, I think you can speak to this as well. I think sometimes when we're even talking about evergreen content, we might be talking about having like pillars of like different industries and different verticals that you can personalize to the various companies that you can leverage in multiple ways, but making sure you have that content available. So it might be ABM focused, but it's more evergreen and outlives the list, the ABM target account list that you should be updating anyway. So
Yep, that's great. And where it relates to one-to-one, one-to-few, and one-to-many, the most hyper-personalized content is going to be to your one-to-one accounts, which is basically you are marketing to that particular account and to the people within the account, right? So there's a lot of research. There should be a heavy amount of personalization directly to that particular account. There'll be less personalization when you go to the one-to-few, but you want to make sure to group accounts together that have commonalities, right? So you can speak to the common pain points and challenges. And when you get to more one to Did I say one to few earlier or one to many? If I said one to many, I meant one to few. And then if you're doing one to many, think of that as more programmatic, and chances are there's probably not going to be a lot of personalization to that content. And it's more about the distribution of the content to the particular accounts, if you will. Okay, we've got another question teed up here. I'm going to direct this to you, Libby. So be prepared. The question is there a way to do account-based display without purchasing an ABM advertising platform? Maybe Google Display using customer match?
That's a great question. It depends a little bit too on what your current tech stack looks like. I know that HubSpot has great integrations as well if you're currently using HubSpot, to match with the Google company match as well, to do that targeted display advertising without having to purchase a specific like ABM or ABA rather, account-based advertising platform. So there are ways to do it. And I've spoken to multiple demand gen focused people that prefer the method of doing customer match or company match via Google Ads versus investing in a software. But the kicker is, and I say this understanding the investment in account-based advertising technology is pretty hefty. The kicker is it's not always going to be as easy. It's going to be much more manual. And you are able to get a little bit more targeted in terms of persona and even sometimes contacts based on the different types of ABA technology that you're using. So there's definitely workarounds, but if you're looking for something that's going to help you get off the ground sooner than later, then those technology platforms, the account-based advertising platforms, are definitely helpful.
Yes, when it comes to the point to where it's affordable and it makes sense within your program, it's definitely a nice to have, not a need to have. Would it be fair to say too that when you're using like the Google Display Network, using customer match and other things, then most likely your ad spend is going to be more expensive than the actual ad spend in your ABM program. So you are in essence kind of saving money from that perspective as well.
Yes, exactly. I mean, anytime you're getting more targeted, rather than casting a wider net, the spend is going to technically go farther. It doesn't seem like it, but that's absolutely correct, Nicole.
Awesome. Daniela or Stephanie, anything that you'd like to add on to that?
No, nothing for me.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next question. I'm going to pull another question that was from the content session as well. And this one is around email marketing. So the question was, how does email marketing fit into all of this? I'm assuming all of ABM. And how do you approach it differently with ABM? So how does email marketing fit into ABM, and how do you approach it differently when you're considering an account-based strategy? Stephanie.
Okay, email marketing. I mean, I think, like I said before, the thing to think about with these different like content tactics is that you're basically using the same rules, right, around content, around email marketing, and you're just fitting it into how is this going to speak to this particular group of accounts and the people within the buying committee of these accounts. So it's about that obsession with your customer, with what they are, what they're looking for, really getting to know them and, getting super targeted and personalized to their needs. And so like the best practices for email marketing are the same rules when it comes to ABM. It's just how you are applying it to that specific group of folks.
That's great. That's great. Daniel, Libby, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, you want to start segmenting your different industries. You may even segment by horizontals, have your different personas at each of those industries and horizontals. And you can then, if you have enough differentiation between personas, those different verticals, then you can implement a email-based ABM strategy, just by hitting those various segments with the message that's more targeted to them than it would be, if you did a general message. Like, it may not resonate as much, especially, some industries. Yeah, when you have mom and pops all the way up to enterprise, you can't use one. You have to use an ABM strategy, otherwise you lose both of them.
Yeah, that's great insight.
Yeah, nowadays as well with take it back to what Steph said, email marketing etiquette, as well as like GDPR compliance. You want to make sure the message that you're sending those people in their inboxes is relevant, so that you stay within compliance and within that etiquette, but also so that you can catch their attention, and so that you're actually speaking to what they need.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. And I would like for anyone to answer this, whoever would like to start. So the question is there a rule of thumb for ABM campaign spend?
Spend as much as you have from your customer or the CEO.
That's not going to fly, Daniel. I need something better than that.
Sometimes I like to think of it as reverse engineering. So whatever your revenue goal is should be like divided by 10 for your spend, or even less. So, you should be making up 10 times at least 10 times how much you're spending. Obviously that varies. And honestly, account-based marketing is pretty expensive at the beginning. So sometimes you have to spend a lot at the beginning, and invest a lot in that account-based marketing spend in order to get to the point where you're creating a repeatable budget that actually shows that equation, that actually has an equation of, okay, well, we spent this much money on this target account, and then they closed for this much. But the larger the account, like Daniel said, spend as much money as you can, because it ends up paying off. And in the long run, when you're talking about things like advertising to those target accounts and other efforts that you can control, even some direct mail, it ends up being should be much lower than your actual acquisition cost. Your actual acquisition cost should be much lower than the actual customer lifetime value.
Yeah. And Daniel, I totally gave you a hard time, but I know where you were coming from. The fact is, as marketers, we never have probably the budget that we really want or even maybe need. And so when given the opportunity, take it, right? But it's more the prioritization of the spend. So what I love about account-based marketing is that you can think strategically about where you're putting your money. But to Libby's point, your return is not going to happen right away. And so the expectation of 10x, which you put it out there, Libby, the expectation of making 10x of your spend, in year one is probably unrealistic, but at some point you should get that. So sorry about that, Daniel. I was giving you a hard time, but if you'd like to respond.
Oh yeah, I'll give the glib answer, but if you're using all the different tactics, like if you have intent data, then you should spend more money where you're seeing intent, because you're more likely to get that return on investment. If you're seeing bombard a surge from one company now you can try targeting them more heavily than someone who's not surging on topics or coming onto your website. So spend as much, but spend it intelligently.
Very, very good. I love that. I wish that we could say, here's how much you should spend as a rule of thumb, but I think that was all. Those are excellent answers. All right, let's move on to the next question. So the next question is, would you accept confirmation from sales that an account is interested in your solution based on conversations with stakeholders as a substitute for intent? That's an interesting question. I am open to whoever would like to take that first.
That's a multi-layered question. Because if you have a product or a service that can fill the needs across many job departments, and your salesperson only talks to someone from one department, then that's not a good indication. You'd want to keep spending and targeting the other departments that could still make a buying decision. Geez, and but otherwise, if they do get all the stakeholders together and they all collectively say no, that's still not. It also depends on the level. What if you just talk to the managers? You can still go to the VPs, but if you go to the top, like if you hit the CEO and the CEO says no, you're probably just going to make him angry if you go and try to go the end around, especially if you try to do it too quickly.
Something that's interesting in this question too is layering on using ungated content. So whoever asked this question asked it in a very smart way. It's hard to measure intent or to measure that engagement without having like form fills or anything like that without the technology. You're relying on hopefully some like Google Analytics, maybe. You're relying on more so those one-to-one. Oh, I just mixed up questions, didn't I?
That's okay. That's okay. You did, but I knew where you were going with that. Yeah.
Well, all that to say though, I think there is something to be said for, having conversations with stakeholders at companies and your sales team, like saying that, but there's also something to be said about anonymous website visits that could identify that there's more intent or even less intent than is being signaled by the stakeholders. That would be my main piece there in terms of like actually measuring intent, because a lot of times, I mean, we all know, at least Nicole and I don't know if Stephanie or Daniel have had sales experience, but we've had sales experience where I'm sure, someone can keep you pretty engaged throughout the sales process. And you could be like, yeah, no, they're really biting, they're ready. But we all know that sometimes they pull the rug out from underneath us. And there's different signals that can help identify that. And intent is one of those where you can identify if someone's losing intent even as well. There's different tools to leverage. I know Terminus has tools like email engagement and stuff like that to identify intent.
So I think you hit on a great point. And I can speak to this because I have been in sales a lot. Salespeople do have a tendency to be overly optimistic. And it's like, oh yes, they told me this. Well, they may have just told you that because it's what you maybe wanted to hear. It would be nice to be able to cross-reference that with something that could kind of prove it out a little bit more than just doing that. And I would think that maybe it'd be a little bumpy too, if it's like just ad hoc acceptance of just, oh, okay, we'll just take that. And, then it's like, there goes your process and your systems and things like that. So I would say there could be, I wouldn't just dismiss it, but how can you kind of, use the tools maybe that you have to be able to verify that that's true.
Yeah, and also if you have highly differentiated products in your space, like if you're not in the service industry, then just because they're showing interest for your product, sometimes the devil is in the details, like whether or not that prospect is a better fit for your company or one of your competitors. So while there might be a lot of intent, they need your product class, they may not specifically need your product. So in those cases, you probably should trust your salespeople.
Yeah. That's a great conversation. Okay, I'm going to jump over to another question that came from the content session. So be prepared, Stephanie, because this one is coming your way. Okay, the question is, a podcast is a long-term content strategy. What would be some of the short-term content strategies in ABM other than emails or maybe case studies? Because with enterprise sales, more often than not, customers aren't comfortable going live with their info. So case studies aren't exactly feasible. What would you say to that?
Yeah, great question. Podcasts are definitely, we talked about this, Nicole, how they are a long-term investment, right? It takes a long time to get up and running, to create your episodes, to get, the word out, and they're very time intensive. So that may not be for everybody. So what's something that you could get into maybe a little more quickly? And I will go back to what I said before about repurposing that evergreen content that you already have, that okay, this is a really great piece of, this is a great pillar page, or this is a great long form article that we wrote on this topic. Let's turn that into something that can be repackaged and repurposed for this particular buyer persona, you know, for this campaign or for this particular vertical, this industry that we have as part of our target account group. So that's what I would say is probably an easier thing to get into, like a content tactic to get into if you can't get into a podcast, which is, you know, obviously takes several people, you know, to really do the podcast production, and takes a lot of time, and it's kind of a longer term strategy.
Yep. Libby or Daniel, anything you'd like to add on to that?
I think you said it best when we were chatting before this went live, Nicole, that it's a labor of love sometimes. All of my favorite podcasts that I listen to, they are labors of love, that somehow it catches enough critical mass. Not everyone's Joe Rogan, so don't expect your podcast to go through the roof.
Yeah, I think that's great. And please, Stephanie, go ahead.
Well, just the other thing to think about with podcasts is that a podcast is an amazing engine to fuel your content. So if you do have a regular podcast, you can immediately repurpose it for blog content, email, social media. Like those episodes are gold for other types of content on other channels. So don't just think of it as my podcast is just going to sit over here and not do anything else. If your goal with your podcast is to reach out to your target account list, invite them on your podcast to be guests and to, you know, create a relationship, it could be super high value. Maybe no one's listening. Maybe only 10 people start listening, but maybe you get, you know, 10 of your target accounts to like really be engaged and trust you. So it might be worth it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to speak to this a little bit as well, as I'm now the host of Grow Your B2B Business podcast, which is a fairly new podcast. And just transparently, it took me a good 6 months until I just got to the point of committing to say, yes, I'm going to do this. Because when you commit to something like that, it's important to keep it going, right? So I needed to make sure that was it. But one of the things that just don't do, you need to have a mix of long-term and short-term at the same time. So if you always say, I don't have time for that podcast, I need to do the short-term. If you're always focusing on the short-term, then you never build the long-term. And I can speak from just many companies that have successfully used podcasts, that over time, it can by far be the most successful, channel and tactic, for growing a business. So it can be highly productive, but you've got to go into it, with the labor of love, like wanting to do it. I'm doing it because I truly am interested in helping, businesses grow. And I love talking to people. Now, at the same time, it's obviously a strategy for Mojo to be able to bring, to bring our target accounts on, but we don't ever try to sell them, and it will just happen naturally, to build those relationships. But yeah, in terms of content creation, it can spit out a bunch of things. So don't not get started just because it's long-term. Like, you got to pick some long-term things. Just don't pick too many. Okay, let's go to, we've got a couple of other questions in the chat. I'd like to answer these. Okay, so the first one is, if you're running ABM without an ABM platform and using ungated content, how do you measure account engagement in the dark funnel? Any tools that you recommend? Now, throw that
You
out.
started this one. Why don't you finish your answer?
I apologize. I feel like I started a little bit of this one. I always love hearing words like the dark funnel and like those trademarked like phrases as well from technology companies. I mean, this is a really hard one. This is why those technology companies have a stake in the market. It's hard to measure engagement with ungated content, particularly, especially if all of your content is ungated. You'd be relying primarily on email marketing for understanding engagement, maybe some advertising. But there's a reason why those companies like Demandbase, I'm pretty sure, and then 6sense and Terminus and all of those various companies have such a huge stake in the market in terms of identifying engagement, or Bombora, all of those companies, I think have massive stakes in the, in the market because of that. But I think there's ways around it. There's always a way around it. That's what I'm coming to learn. That's what I feel like marketing is about. There's always crafty ways around it. They're just much more manual, and it's, trying to figure out the right secret sauce of measuring email marketing engagement. And also, everyone is going to hate me for saying this, but maybe gating a little bit of your content, at least like the high value stuff, I know a lot of people are like, free your content, and I totally am on board with that, but there's something to be said about that as well, to understand high value engagement.
Thank you. That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question, because I want to make sure we can get through all of them. This is the last one. So the question is, how do you define marketing influence pipeline when using an engagement attribution model? I've seen suggestions from Demandbase that they use 3 unique engagements from 2 buying committee members as a measure of marketing influence. Oh, wow. Okay. Who would like to take that one?
That one's getting really specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we use it as were we able to get, was that person an influencer or a decision maker, and did they meet with us? Were we able to then get them into the active buying process? If so, then we give marketing some small wins just if we get someone filling out our forms, like our contact us form or see a demo form, and then we're working on doing some influence-based attribution models, depending on how high up the chain we get. As we get just that lower level influencer, if there's a lot of tiers in the buying process, as opposed to getting in that decision maker. Is our sales team jokes, we want the VP of sales with $1 million falling out of their pocket, and they have their thumb already on the DocuSign sign button. Obviously that one, if they can bring that lead in, that's an easy, hey, you get 100% of this marketing. But when it's a longer sales cycle, multiple people, there's a ton of ones. It just has to make sense for your business. If everyone agrees on it, then that's the right one, whether or not it's Demandbase's or someone else's.
I think that's great. And I think where Demandbase is coming from in this is just, don't rely on one action to go, oh, they're engaged, right? And so what I'm reading into this is, it's going to be different for every company, but just think, from the perspective of the campaigns you're running, to how can you really show engagement? It's going to be through multiple different avenues usually. And so whether that's, ad clicks or, web visits or whatever the case might be, we need to have a bigger group of activities to pull from to be able to actually truly say they're engaged. What would you say to that, Libby?
Yeah, I think additionally, when it comes to like marketing influence, to take that back to Daniel, I totally agree with you, Nicole. 100% would put that on my grave, that it's a lot more than one action or one engagement to say that something's showing engagement or even showing marketing influence. I think to take it back to marketing influence pipeline, how can in terms of that engagement attribution model, defining marketing influence pipeline is really hard, because obviously in an ABM model, marketing and sales should be working like this. So I do think that's, Nicole, I'll just completely echo what you're saying. When it comes to that in an ABM program, you really need to see more than one action, more than one maybe engagement in order to really define that as
marketing influenced. Awesome, guys. Well, we are at time, just a couple minutes over, but it was perfect. We answered all the questions. So hopefully everybody learned a lot in this session. Thank you.